the more spiritually and psychologically mature we become, the more we acknowledge that we really only have one entity that we need to be in connection with, and that's with God.
Welcome to In Her Image, a podcast where we are seeking and celebrating our Mother God through scripture, scholarship, the arts, and everyday life. I'm your host, Kate. And today, sitting with me is a very special guest, Valerie Hamaker. Valerie is a relationship therapist with advanced training in trauma recovery, sexual health, and family systems work. She runs a private practice in Missouri and speaks locally and nationally on a wide variety of topics. She is the host of a podcast titled Generation Xausted that tackles issues around midlife crisis. Recently, she felt impressed to start speaking on the challenges that Latter-day Saints are having in a variety of areas and launched a second podcast titled Latter-day Struggles, which I stumbled upon via Instagram and basically have been binging over the past week or so. It has grown so quickly that Valerie has begun to shift her counseling practice from individual and couples therapy to group coaching the many Latter-day Saints suffering through faith and trust crisis. So we will talk more about that as well, but she's really enjoyed, helping many people understand the nature of their struggles and enjoyed creating these small communities. So keep listening for more information if that sounds something that like you wanted to join. So Valerie, welcome.
Hi. Nice to be here. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much. So I would love to just kind of get a brief story from you about how you came to start this podcast, Latter-day Struggles, and what is your goal? What is your objective?
Yeah. Thank you for asking me that question. That's something that we could actually talk about for the whole entire time, but I'll try to be brief. Like you said, I guess I've been in this field for several years. And although I'm in the Midwest, I'm in the Kansas City, Missouri area, I do see a lot of Latter-day Saints. And I just started noticing some of the same problems, some of the same suffering that a lot of them were going through. That was, on the one hand, somewhat unique to our faith tradition. On the other hand, I was starting to notice, because I also get to see evangelical people and Protestants and, all the flavors of conservative Christianity in the Midwest, that there is something very typical about faith development and faith crisis that happens when people move through life and start to recognize that all is not as they thought it was. And so I just decided that, I saw that going on. And also I started noticing some very specific and very troubling issues around the question of patriarchy in our church. And that seemed to be something that was rearing its ugly head over and over again, really, in the couples work that I was doing, in what I was noticing in the individuals that I was seeing, especially a lot of women who didn't know who they were. They didn't know what they wanted to do in life. They didn't even know that they were allowed to have an identity separate and apart from what they were told they were supposed to be. And as a therapist, I found that highly problematic. And I started going deeper into trying to better understand the nature of the problem. And it led me down a path of reading and studying and prayer and talking and even doing a little bit of presenting. And I started noticing there was one specific moment where I knew I needed to do the podcast, honestly. And I hadn't even really thought about that until you asked me this question, but I actually spoke to a group of women about burnout, of all things, because I was actually talking about my other platform, my professional platform, and I started talking about that. And some of the women started opening up about how they were feeling and how they were suffering. This is a group of Latter-day Saint women. And I started inviting the possibility that we could grow as individuals, our own spiritual agency, and do what we thought was best for us, that comes from deep within, independent of what some outside authority thought. And that was so threatening to the host of this gathering that I was pretty much kicked out of the house, Kate. I mean,
in the moment.
in the moment, she kind of did that thing where it was almost like she had felt to cast out an evil spirit. And I was like, what in the world is going on here? This is crazy. I was actually encouraging people to go deeply into their own psychological growth and saying, if we do this, we as a church will be a stronger community. And this woman saw this as a threat. And basically, she stood up and sort of bore testimony against me. And it was so traumatic and upsetting to me that I graciously kind of finished up and did what I needed to do to kind of like leave. But it was really upsetting to me. And I immediately actually reached out to my one of my colleagues who I really trust, the gentleman who started the podcast with me. And he said to me, he said, Valerie, you know too much. You cannot be silent about this. This is not okay. And so that's when we sort of started talking about, like, we need to start talking about this. We need to help people understand the nature of the problem. And he and I kicked this off together, and then he kind of moved on to other things, and it turned out to work out perfectly because I've been visiting with my husband about these things for years, and he's a little easier to schedule with than another outside individual. And off we started, and it's only been going on for 4 or 5 months, and it's exploded. The need is profound. A lot of people in our faith are very much suffering and need a lot of help. They're in crisis. They're in faith crisis. They're in trust crisis. They want to stay, a lot of them, but they don't know how. They don't know how to do so in integrity. They want to make sense of what hurts so much about their own relationship with the church. And then by extension, a lot of them tie that to the relationship with God and divinity. And it's in fact, it's traumatic. It's a crisis. So that's my not very short answer.
Thank you. Thank you for doing it. It's brave. When I listen, I'm like, wow, she's brave saying these things that, I listened to the Last She Said It podcast, similarly, just like, let's just say it.
Yeah.
Let's just say it. And it's, the response is, I think, amazing. How many people are like, yep, me too. I wonder about that too. So, I appreciate that. And I love, you talk about spiritual agency and psychological agency kind of being hand in hand or the same thing.
Yes.
Could you define that for us a little bit?
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed is I've gotten just like floods of feedback since I've been doing this show is so many people have said almost the very same phrase to me. I didn't know I was allowed to fill in the blank. And I guess I've always just been a little bit feistier than, I've been pretty feisty since I've been, that's how I came in mind. I'm like, of course you can. Like, you can actually, like, we are all endowed with something incredibly profound. It's agency. We can govern our own destinies. And actually, the way I sort of see it, and I've talked about this on my podcast, is the greatest gift we have ever been given that even precedes the grand atonement of our Savior Jesus Christ is the gift of agency. We chose into this mortal existence. We chose to come here. We choose to accept the infinite nature of the gifts of Jesus Christ's atonement. We actually have the power if we want to reject it, but we have this power to choose who we are, what our eternal destiny is, what we believe, what feels true. And God even gives us a mechanism whereby we can come to know what is true. And it's almost in some ways like there's a collective memory loss in our generation of the church where people don't even know that they have the ability to choose, to discern, to be able to sense what is right and what doesn't feel good, what is loving, what is just, what is merciful. And so that is what my whole podcast has evolved into. Is I'm trying to help people acknowledge this divine gift that has always actually been theirs, their ability to be agents into themselves, to be personal authorities, to be able to discern when leaders and authority figures are speaking truth, which they do sometimes, and when they are not speaking truth, which they also do sometimes. And so that is what I'm actually helping people acknowledge. They've always had this thing. It's just been sort of like, latent, like, a light that hasn't been turned on. It's actually in some cases we've been trained to not turn this on. And we've been trained to sort of defer to some sort of an outside source. And that doesn't serve us well. It doesn't serve us well as individuals, as couples, as families, as communities, as churches. it creates in us underdeveloped children of divine parents. And that's why I think we're suffering so much. We struggle a lot because we have spiritual agency and we don't even recognize it, which is psychological agency, the agency to go within and recognize there's something divine within us. We have divine DNA coursing through our bodies all the time, and we just need to use it. And so that is kind of what every single episode, I'm looking at various situations and problems and ways that people suffer, and helping them recognize that not only can we sort of make sense of it and do so in like a gracious and graceful way, with not doing so in a way that is attributing poor intent to people, but the damage is the same when we are not cultivating and encouraging people to have spiritual and psychological agency. And when we have it, then we're able to use that and discern how to manage complex situations like the situation that our church is in right now, which is a crisis situation because of, a variety of things. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, it does. And I mean, it spurs a lot of thoughts for me right now. And so I'm like, oh man, I got to keep this reeled in because there's so much we could talk about. And in regards to that and what it means to hand over our agency to someone else, and then what kind of the pain of taking it back and saying, actually, this is mine. I'm going to be the one accounting for my life. So I know other people aren't comfortable with this, but I'm going to take this back and live true to it. So
yeah, exactly.
I love, I'm going to plug right here one of your top episodes, and that I believe every person, no matter where you fall, should listen to, is about the stages of faith, your Sunstone Symposium. So we'll be sure to link that and so on. But today I wanted to get your expertise, your help with the subject of fear. So for many of us, when someone starts asking questions about Heavenly Mother, or we start speaking openly about her, one of the most common responses that we get is fear. Usually the fear is connected to that the feminine divine is leading people out of the church, quotation mark. Yeah, that's one of the biggest fears that I've received personally. And I mean, to be honest, like when I first started even thinking about Heavenly Mother more, and I started reading articles, I was like, I'm afraid to like dive into this. I felt, hesitation, but my excitement about it and my good feeling about it overwhelmed that hesitancy. But can you speak to that? Why do you think there's a connection between Heavenly Mother and fear of leaving the church? That seems like a big one.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kate. And there's so many different directions I could go. So let me just sort of free associate here for a minute. The first thing that kind of comes up for me is that we as a church system are really heavily, we're heavily identified with knowing stuff. We like to believe that we know a lot of stuff and that we know more stuff than other organizations. And so I think the idea of a feminine divine is tapping into a little bit of fear because it's an unknown quantity on some levels within the larger story of Christianity, not because the feminine divine has never been present. There's a lot of very good scholarship that proves clearly that the feminine divine has been profoundly present and was even the governing entity long before the divine, sort of long before God belonged to maleness. Mm-hmm. So it's part of ancient scholarship that has slowly been pulled away, not just with our, small little baby church, relative to the grand scheme of things, but it's something that is something that brings fear to all faith traditions, especially Christian faith traditions. And so we don't necessarily know what to make of it. And we have actually morphed this, the way that the feminine divine has been taken away as if somehow it has always been that way and it was always meant to be, and that somehow we're trying to impose femininity onto something that's always been masculine. That's just straight up incorrect doctrine. That is not, if you look at the actual archaeological books and studies, that's actually incorrect. And yet we are a church that likes to, I mean, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but we posture as if we know more than we do know. And so we veer, I notice that I think there's a lot of fear there because historically in the church, there's a low understanding about the nature of the feminine divine. And that comes from sort of, I kind of think, and again, this is speculative. This is just Valerie trying to make sense of it all. You know, Joseph Smith has a theophany and he sees two male figures in some of the accounts, right? And so therefore, we then oversimplify it and say, this is how it is and has been and always will be. And we really diminish the potential complexity of what it means to be God based on that one specific, based on the first vision. And then I think we sort of calcify that and then we just sort of cling onto it and hold on to it. And like, this is our, boxed up theology with a bow on top. And anybody that has a problem with it is not being, righteous enough. And then that really brings up a lot of angst in a lot of the rest of us, I think, because there's something, in my opinion, that there's some deep wisdom sense part of us that's like, but the divine can't be just masculine. That it doesn't ring true to that inner divine part of us that knows that there's something deep and true about divinity being both masculine and feminine. And so there's this yearning that we feel, I think, as a maturing body, where we want to know more, but I think there's also a bit of a resistance from the formal hierarchy of the church to address it because of what I've just been talking about, just sort of like this large fear and anxiety around feminine divine. But I think also too, just to sort of take it in a slightly different direction, it is my feeling that if we start addressing a feminine divine, we have to start looking at how we have stripped women from power here in this world, in the church. If you give a voice and you give the true identity that a feminine divine has, then clearly she has the power of God because she is a God. And then the next step is clearly she has, what is the power of God called? Well, it's called priesthood. And then if you have a feminine divine that has the power of God because she is a God, then why would her daughters not have the power also? Well, the logic completely breaks down. The women then, of course, should have the power of God if their God figure has feminine components to her. And I think that is just something that terrifies the hierarchical church because they don't know what to do with it. It's too scary to them. They would have to then admit that maybe women should have had the priesthood all along, which of course is what a lot of, I think, other Christian tradition churches are acknowledging and reversing a lot of their policies, are recognizing that they have been a part of a larger culture that has oppressed women. And they are reversing a lot of their stances and recognizing that we have been sucked into the same thing that all of humanity has been sucked into, which is marginalizing lots of various populations at different times and periods. Now, a lot of the rest of the world is catching up and noticing and being accountable. And we, because of our heavy and strong commitment to rightness, we don't tend to really like doubling back and recognizing that we have been ignorant and wrong. I know, again, that's a big answer, but I'll stop there. How does that feel?
It feels like a big, brave answer, but I agree. Yeah. I think, as some would say, power protects itself. And whether it's even that conscious or not, whether they are thinking that far ahead, thinking this means this, that means this, but there's just something in it that's like, if we open up the gates here, things will change too much for us.
Yes.
And we're not ready to.
What then do we have to also address if we're going to actually live in our own integrity? Yeah. And it does open up it opens up a whole floodgate of how much we, again, it's institutional, unique to us, but it's also not unique to us. I love living in the Midwest because I fact check all sorts of things with my evangelical and Protestant friends. I'm constantly like, tell me, like, what is your church like? How do they navigate this thing? What about this thing? I've got several friends here in the Midwest that love my podcast because they're like, they recognize the idiosyncratic differences that we have in our faith, but there's a lot that's the same in that churches in general tend to have big mammoth struggles with gender, sex, patriarchy, and power. It's embedded in the problems of conservative Christianity and other religions too. It just seems to be the one I notice more because I'm knee deep in it with the work that I do, but it's a big problem all around. But in specific, I think with our church, because of some of our specific special issues that we struggle with.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's been interesting I think my first passion was just like, I have a Heavenly Mother. Like, of course I love her. I want to know her. And just over the past couple of years, like suddenly I'm like, I woke up one morning and I'm like, oh, I'm a feminist. Like, and something that like previously, it's an enemy to the church, right? So I wouldn't have associated myself that way. But now I'm like, oh, I am a feminist, and it's come quite naturally as I really insist that God is both Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. One of my biggest issues or, thoughts on this idea that Heavenly Mother is leading people out of the church is sort of this logical knot that it ties, because I'm like, well, is Heavenly Mother God or not? If she's not God, then here's all the things you're saying about womanhood, that although men cannot be exalted without a woman cannot be exalted at all. Like, we are not God, right? And if she is God, then what you're saying is God is leading people out of the church. And your assumption is that the church is right and God is wrong. Like,
I see that actually all the time in my work, Kate, and I read about it all the time too. In that, in their own, it's fascinating to me that we so deeply embed a testimony of like the church, and I use that in hand quotes, so deeply that when people go into crisis, they will stand by the church and throw God out the window. And I've seen that with struggles with polygamy. I've seen that with struggles with our beautiful sexual and gender minority family and friends, that they believe so much in the false traditions of their parent church that they will believe the church at the expense of their relationship with God. And when I started noticing that, I'm like, what have we done? This is not okay. First of all, the church can and is able sometimes to be a vehicle to bring people closer to God. That is, and when I use God, it's God plural. Elohim is the plural of God, right? The church can bring people closer to God, and sometimes does, but the church also can be a vehicle that injures and wounds people and actually takes people away from God. And so the one thing that I tend to do frequently in my small groups and also on my podcast is help people unlink their relationship with an institution run by well-meaning but very mortal humans, with the fact that we have all been endowed with this powerful capacity to be in deep relationship with with God, not mediated through anybody. I don't care who it is and how great they are, prophet or otherwise. And if there is something that is wounding our ability to be in closer contact with God, or that's even like limiting our ability to come to know our heavenly parents, I find that highly problematic. I'm really resistant to anybody even insinuating that they tell me how I worship, or even actually who I worship. That's a problem, because guess what? That relationship is between me and them. And how I experience my relationship, I can't remember. There was a movie that was on a few years ago, so I'm not even going to try to quote the movie, but the essence of the movie was somebody who who'd been in a very abusive relationship as a child. Their God character, their God figure that they worshipped was a Black woman. And as I thought about that, I thought, well, of course, what they're trying, that in them is the embodiment of somebody who is kind, loving, and safe. And so we as children of God, already it's very well established in scholarship that we create God in our image. We just do that. And so for us to be able, especially as women who feel so estranged and orphaned by a feminine divine, for us to want and crave and desire to worship something that looks like us is absolutely, not only is it appropriate, it's spiritually healthy to cleave to that which feels safe, warm, and healthy, something that we would like to imagine in our prayer state. either waking or on our knees, if we want to feel like we want to climb up into the arms of a loving mother, why can't we do that? And to sort of be told that we're not supposed to do that, or that there's something wrong with how we experience our relationship with our divine parents, I personally find that I feel like that's not just neutral, but that is wrong. That's inappropriate. It's not okay. And that's where we kick in our own like growing spiritual agency, muscles, and we say, not on my watch. I get to worship whomever I want to, because I have a responsibility to be in relationship directly with God, not mediated by any institution or any outside individual, actually.
Thank you. That really, I think, brings it back to how I see, what my answer to this question is, that the question of like, does Heavenly Mother lead people out of the church, or thinking about a Heavenly Mother, whatever people want to say. And I know that it's been cited to me of people that, started with Heavenly Mother and left the church. And I want to say that may be an accurate correlation. There may be correlation there. However, what you've pointed out is that it is the church, it is the patriarchy, it is the usurping of spiritual agency, it is the intolerance for difference. Those are the things that chase people out of the church when we are seeking to connect with God. And
you nailed it. You nailed it.
There's so many of us. This is the faith of our mothers. Like, this is our heritage. This is what we've devoted our life to. And we want to stay desperately. Yes. This is no excuse for us. Like, yes, I can finally get out of all those extra rules. It's like, I feel personally that I have sought my whole life to connect with God. And when I started to see a bigger, more whole picture of God, it started to tear apart my relationship with the institution versus my relationship with God. When I saw that the institution in some ways sometimes impedes that relationship, or has impeded it, hindered it, probably yes. A better word. And, to be clear, like right now I'm still in the church. I'm still trying my best to be part of this community because I do love it.
Yes. What you're describing to me is very similar to the experience that a lot of people are having. Some of them around relationship with the feminine divine, but I mean there are a variety of different places where people are trying to hold on to themselves, and at the same time trying to figure out a way to hold on to community. That's what we're always on, sort of like a little bit of a teeter-totter, trying to navigate this deep desire. These are both like really deeply embedded in our humanity. And also I think in our how we are children of God, right? Is that we want community, we want connection, we want the safety of people around us that are our people. All of us want that. Mm-hmm. And we also, as we grow, especially, we become, the appetite that we have to take ownership of ourselves, to be truly given that, and to be able to act according to our own moral agency, that becomes a really strong drive that actually means somebody is psychologically and spiritually maturing. And so when people have these desires to worship in ways that feel right to them, and they're actually told by the outside institution that they are not allowed to, or there's some shame around it, or some any sort of heavy-handedness, something inside of that developing, growing human being starts to get a little cringy. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, hold on. You are out of your lane. And the thing that you just described too is very accurate, which is most of the time, at least people that listen to my podcast, they still want that connection. They want community. They love the heritage. They love the idea of being sort of wrapped in the warm arms of a loving community, that is a lot of their experience. Right. And yet at the same time, sometimes they feel like they have to make a choice because the institution is seemingly not allowing them to grow in their own spirituality, which seems like the biggest paradox. What we want is an institution that welcomes us and also welcomes our growth. What I notice sometimes is it feels, at least to me, is that sometimes the institution is actually threatened by people that are spiritually growing, and they really want, or they seem to. I never like to attribute motive. I believe that people's hearts are almost always very, very earnest and in the right place. But it does seem that there is a threat when somebody moves beyond that stage of orthodoxy and starts actually really challenging some of these black and whites, because what moving through the stages of faith are, which is from my episode number 33 of Latter-day Struggles, is that they're moving from orthodoxy to this place of deeper engagement with their own relationship with God. And by necessity, a big piece of that is moving away from the blacks and whites of institutional religion. It just happens that way. It's always going to be that way. So people that are here, once they recognize that they're not crazy, they're not alone, they're not sinning, they're not evil, but they're actually progressing, then a lot of times they can kind of like stabilize themselves and recognize that, like, maybe I can figure out a way to have a complex relationship with a faith tradition in a way that is in harmony with the part of me that is also tenaciously, where I'm going to grow and I'm going to keep growing in relationship to God, and nobody's going to stop me.
Yes. I had this written out as two sort of questions of, when individuals, when people close to us say, I think this might be leading you down a wrong path, versus when the institution responds, less than positively towards this. And I really think that they are part and parcel. They're one and the same, because those individuals who may have this response, I'm thinking that comes from a place of enmeshment with the church. And
sure.
So I want to know, I would love your advice about how we can respond to those around us who feel fearful about where our questions are taking us. How can we maintain relationships, both personal and institutional, when we're up against this big emotion of fear?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that you've already started, part of your question is answered in what you just said just barely, which is, first, we have to acknowledge that what is driving their response to us is in fact fear. And so the thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to respond in fear also. What we want to do as we are developing our own spiritual autonomy is we always want to respond in love. Fear is destructive. Love is creative. I repeat that to myself 1,000 times a day. It's just so important to recognize that when someone, the church or an individual enmeshed with the church orthodoxy, responds that way, I try really hard not to engage, because they're in a different place. And I'm also lucky enough, I think. I didn't used to think I was lucky enough, but I'm beginning to believe I'm lucky enough. I've been in the orthodoxy for a lot of my life, and so I get them. They were my people.
Yeah.
And so I really understand the nature of their fear. And if the future me had approached the past me in my Orthodox days and had tried to aggressively tell them that there was something wrong with them, the past me would have been absolutely unresponsive, 100%. And I would have probably had a lot of really savvy ways to tell them that they were actually, going to hell in a handbasket and all the things, right? Yeah. And so I've come to actually realize that when I approach dialogue, or there's a situation like that where I'm pretty darn sure that I am working with somebody at a different place, I don't engage. I might try to love them, and I'll listen, and I'm interested because I am genuinely interested in the stage of development that is, because it's familiar to me. And then I may try in very subtle ways to invite, like in sort of like gently curious ways, just invite a different way of thinking about something. But nobody is ever pushed to see things differently. They have to have their own experience. And the other thing that I've noticed, Kate, is that the very most powerful thing that I can do to even begin to possibly evoke spiritual growth in another person who is rigidly orthodox is by just pouring forth the gifts and the fruits of the Spirit. in the way I work with them. I try to love, I try to be kind, I try to actually embody what it means to be a true follower of my Savior, Jesus Christ. And that is going to just confuse the daylights out of these folks that think that I'm actually falling away because of these crazy, unorthodox beliefs that I'm carrying around. My hope is that I'm actually, they're going to walk away, be completely confused. Like, how can they carry such a love and confidence and a spirit about them when they're actually going to hell because they're leaving the and I'm not even saying I'm leaving the church. I'm just leaving. Yes. I'm leaving that stage, and I don't choose to believe the way I've chosen to become an owner of my own spiritual destiny. And that is the kind of thing that will disorganize their orthodox brains just enough to be like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And that's when they can begin at their own time and place to enter into a place of self-curiosity, which may in fact open the door somewhere down the road to their becoming more spiritually developed themselves, usually because something in their own lives begins to not match up with the dogma of the church. That's oftentimes what pushes people into a spiritual growth, a growth spurt, not somebody coming down on them and being judgmental or, like, you're crazy or how dare you. That doesn't work. But if we increase our love, if we show forth the fruits of the Spirit, and then we allow life to teach them as soon as something doesn't line up for them, then they at least have the opportunity. I'm not convinced that it always happens. I feel like some people they're born and they die in orthodoxy, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But not always. And I think sometimes we can invite them. And then the last thing I guess I'll say, I know I'm kind of going on and on, but how do we respond to people who are frightened of us or who challenge us? The other thing that I think is a product of psychological and spiritual agency is we become less and less needing of the validation of other people. We become more and more okay with other people not being okay with us, because really the more spiritually and psychologically mature we become, the more we acknowledge that we really only have one entity that we need to be in connection with, and that's with God. And it's okay if other people think that we're, all the things that they're going to, say. We just get more and more comfortable. Not maybe initially. I think as humans, we get cringy. Like, we just feel like bad. We like, oh, they don't like me. They think I'm. But then it rolls over us, and we recognize, like, I'm on an errand. I've got too much to do to sort of be worrying about what the people in the cheap seats are saying about me. I'm okay. And we have to kind of keep walking ourselves through that. And that's what psychological and spiritual agency actually, it's one of the fruits of that kind of growth and development. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, it does. Just to kind of go back to the core of that the scripture, perfect love casteth out all fear.
Yes,
that is a good mantra reminder. And it's definitely difficult for me to not engage. But I think it's wise, because I'm not going to be convinced. And so neither are they.
No, precisely.
Well, thank you so much for this time. I have one more question that we like to ask each of our guests. And that is, well, I'll tell you first how this question was born. Several months ago, I read an article, about Mormon feminism, and I felt like it was saying, like, basically, like, you're never going to change the church. And it felt very deflating to me. It felt like, man, this is so frustrating. But my wise friends reminded me that it's not about changing the church. It's about being changed. And specifically, being changed by Heavenly Mother. And so I want to ask you, how has Heavenly Mother changed you?
Okay. I've shared I wouldn't say quite a bit, but a little bit about this on my own podcast. And I've actually been very transparent about, you mentioned my bravery early on in this episode, and I take that in, and I agree. It does take a lot of bravery to speak truth to power in an institution that is not inviting of voices like mine and yours. And I've wrestled quite a bit I'm not wrestling as much anymore. I think I'm in some ways I've I've taken in, and it's really solidified what I'm here to do and why. But that's not to say I don't also have my periodic bad days, but I used to have a lot of bad days in the early podcast, in the spring especially. And moments where I thought, I don't know if it's worth it or if it's a waste of my time. I've had some people say the same thing. Valerie, what you're doing is cute, but you're never going to change the massive, machine that is the church. And I would listen to that, and yet I still kept feeling this call, feeling sort of, moved forward. And I tell you, the morning that everything changed for me, Kate, was when I was pondering about this very thing, and an impression came to me as clear as day. I'll never forget it. And it was very strong. And it was from my Heavenly Mother. And the voice, it was a feminine voice. It was a divine feminine voice. I know it. And the voice said, Valerie, I don't have a voice, but you do. And I want you to use it. And from that moment on, I remember literally like shaking or nodding my head at this impression. And I was like, okay, enough said, done. I will do it. And so, Kate, to answer your question, I guess, it's an absolute connection between what I'm doing and the lives that I'm lucky enough to be touching rapidly, and my direct call and the communication that I felt like I had from my feminine divine, my Heavenly Mother. And so, yeah, I'm grateful that I have that. It gives me courage. It gives me determination. It really has mitigated a lot of my fear, because when you have a call from God, you stop caring about other things. You don't care about what an institution can do to you, because the fact of the matter is they can't do anything to you. I am firmly bonded to the only things that matter. And so I will carry forward and do what I'm here to do and what I've been given the gifts to do, and continue on with that kind of confidence. And when you have that kind of confidence, just the other things just don't matter very much anymore. So I guess that's how I would answer your question.
Valerie, this has been just exactly what I was looking for. And I so appreciate it. And I encourage all of our listeners to run, don't walk, to check out. You are putting out so many episodes. And so there's a lot to listen to and to feast on. And, I encourage you, if you can, to join one of her groups if you feel called to do that. You're being very, very generous with your time. So thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show, Kate. I wish the best to you, and that you are also making a beautiful difference in the lives of many people. So carry on, my friend.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll share it. And if you haven't yet, please leave us a review. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can make a monthly donation at anchor.fm/inherimage. We hope you'll tune in next Sunday for another inspiring episode.